Hello, my name is Rachel. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a corporate lawyer in Manhattan. For 3 years, I thought I was in a loving relationship with a man who supported my career and believed in my potential. But everything changed the night my boyfriend Marcus looked me straight in the eyes and said with complete conviction, "You'll never survive without me, Rachel. You're too weak to make it on your own." Those words hit me like a physical blow, but they also ignited something inside me that I didn't know existed. Because what Marcus didn't realize as he spoke those devastating words was that he had just given me the most powerful motivation I'd ever received. 18 months later, I made partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in New York City, and the first thing I did was remove his name from the lease of the apartment I'd been paying for all along. But to understand why that moment was both the most painful and the most liberating experience of my life, I need to tell you about the relationship I thought I had and the person I thought Marcus was. When I met Marcus 3 years ago at a networking event, he seemed like everything I had been looking for in a partner. He was charming, intelligent, worked in finance, and appeared to be genuinely interested in my career as a junior associate at a competitive law firm. During our early conversations, he asked thoughtful questions about my work, seemed impressed by my ambitions, and claimed he wanted a partner who was as driven as he was. "I love that you're so passionate about your career," he told me on our third date. "Most women I've dated were intimidated by my success, but you have your own goals and dreams. That's incredibly attractive." For the first year of our relationship, Marcus maintained this supportive facade perfectly. He would ask about my cases, celebrate my small victories, and comfort me during the inevitable setbacks that come with working at a high-pressure law firm. When I worked late nights preparing for trials, he would order takeout to my office. When I was stressed about a difficult client, he would listen patiently and offer what seemed like genuine encouragement. But gradually, so subtly that I didn't notice it happening, Marcus began undermining my confidence in ways that felt like concern rather than manipulation. When I received praise from a senior partner, Marcus would say things like, "That's great, babe, but don't let it go to your head. They probably just needed someone to handle the smaller cases." When I expressed excitement about a challenging new assignment, he would respond with, "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? Maybe you should focus on mastering the basics first." The erosion of my self-confidence was so gradual that I began to internalize these doubts. Maybe I was being too ambitious too quickly. Maybe I should be more grateful for the opportunities I had instead of constantly pushing for more. Maybe Marcus, with his MBA and successful career in finance, understood professional advancement better than I did. When we moved in together after a year and a half, I was the one who found the apartment, handled all the logistics, and paid the security deposit. But Marcus insisted that both our names should be on the lease because we're a team. At the time, it seemed like a reasonable request from someone who claimed to be committed to our future together. During the second year of our relationship, Marcus's undermining tactics became more sophisticated and more frequent. He developed a pattern of scheduling romantic dinners or weekend trips during times when I needed to work on important cases. When I would explain that I couldn't go because of work commitments, he would respond with disappointed sighs and comments like, "You always choose work over us. I guess I know where your priorities really are." He also began criticizing my work habits in ways that seemed helpful, but were actually destructive. "You work too hard," he would say when I brought files home. "You're going to burn out if you keep pushing yourself like this. Maybe you should consider a less demanding position at a smaller firm." Or he would comment on my stress levels. "You've been so tense lately. This job is clearly not good for your mental health." The most damaging aspect of his manipulation was how he gradually isolated me from my support network. When I wanted to attend professional networking events, he would complain about being left alone. When I planned to grab drinks with colleagues after work, he would guilt me by saying he had prepared a special dinner for us. When I received invitations to industry conferences, he would question whether they were really worth the time and expense. "You spend more time with your coworkers than you do with me," became his frequent complaint. "I'm starting to feel like I'm dating your job instead of dating you." Marcus also had a talent for undermining my achievements by attributing them to external factors rather than my own abilities. When I successfully negotiated a difficult settlement, he would say, "The opposing counsel must have been having an off day." When I received positive feedback from clients, he would suggest that they were just being polite. When I was assigned to work on a high-profile case, he would imply that it was because the firm needed to fill a diversity quota, not because of my qualifications. The most insidious part of his behavior was how he made me dependent on his validation. After months of subtle criticism disguised as concern, I began seeking his approval for professional decisions. Should I apply for this promotion? Should I take on this challenging case? Should I attend this conference? Gradually, I stopped trusting my own judgment and started relying on his opinions about my career choices. The breaking point came during the most important period of my career up to that point. I had been working for months on a complex merger case that could potentially lead to a promotion to senior associate. The case required long hours, extensive research, and collaboration with partners at the firm. It was exactly the kind of high-profile work I had dreamed of handling when I first started at the firm. But Marcus seemed determined to sabotage this opportunity. He complained constantly about my schedule, criticized my stress levels, and questioned whether I was really qualified to handle such an important case. "Are you sure you're not in over your head?" he would ask. "Maybe you should talk to the partners about getting some additional support. It's not a sign of weakness to admit when something is beyond your capabilities." The week before the crucial negotiations that would determine the success of the merger, Marcus planned an elaborate surprise weekend getaway. He had booked a cabin in the mountains, made reservations at expensive restaurants, and created an itinerary full of romantic activities. When I explained that I couldn't go because I needed to prepare for the most important week of my career, his reaction was explosive. "You're being ridiculous, Rachel," he said, with a coldness I had never heard before. "One weekend isn't going to make or break this case. You're just using work as an excuse to avoid spending time with me." When I stood firm and explained how crucial this preparation time was, Marcus revealed his true feelings about my career ambitions. "You know what your problem is?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're more important than you actually are. You're not some hotshot lawyer, Rachel. You're a junior associate who got lucky with one decent case. This delusion that you're some kind of legal genius is getting out of hand." I was stunned by the venom in his voice, but he wasn't finished. "You need to get some perspective about your actual value in that firm. They could replace you tomorrow and barely notice the difference. You're not as special as you think you are." That night, after his initial attack on my career and self-worth, Marcus seemed to realize he had gone too far. He apologized, claimed he was just stressed about work, and said he only wanted what was best for me. "I just worry that you're setting yourself up for disappointment," he explained. "I've seen how cutthroat that industry can be, and I don't want to see you get hurt." But the damage was done. For the first time, I saw clearly what had been happening for months. The constant criticism, the undermining of my achievements, the guilt trips about my work schedule. It all suddenly made sense as a deliberate pattern of psychological manipulation designed to keep me small and dependent on his approval. Despite this revelation, I wasn't quite ready to end the relationship. I still loved the man I thought Marcus was, and I hoped that maybe we could work through these issues if I could just perform well enough on this case to prove my capabilities to both the firm and to him. The merger negotiations were intense and challenging, but everything I had learned during months of preparation paid off. I successfully navigated complex legal issues, built strong relationships with opposing counsel, and helped secure a deal that saved my client millions of dollars. The partners at my firm were impressed. The client was thrilled, and I felt more confident in my abilities than I had in months. When I came home that Friday night, exhausted but exhilarated by the successful conclusion of the case, Marcus was waiting for me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I excitedly began telling him about the negotiations, about the positive feedback I had received, and about the possibility that this success might lead to the promotion I had been working toward. But instead of celebration or congratulations, Marcus listened to my excitement with growing irritation. When I finished explaining how well everything had gone, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, he delivered the words that would change everything between us. "You'll never survive without me, Rachel. You're too weak to make it on your own." Something fundamental shifted inside me when Marcus spoke those words. It wasn't just anger, though I was certainly angry. It wasn't just hurt, though I was deeply wounded. It was a moment of absolute clarity about who I really was and what I was actually capable of achieving. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly, giving him a chance to take back the most revealing statement he had ever made about how he really saw me. "You heard me," Marcus replied, doubling down on his cruelty. "Without my support, without my guidance, without me keeping you grounded and realistic about your limitations, you would crash and burn in that firm. You think you're independent, but you need me more than you're willing to admit." In that moment, I made a decision that would define the next chapter of my life. "You're right about one thing," I said, standing up and facing him directly. "I am going to find out exactly what I can accomplish on my own, starting tonight." I walked to our bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began packing my essential belongings. Marcus followed me, alternating between anger and panic as he realized I was serious about leaving. "You're being dramatic. You can't just leave because of one argument. We can work through this." "This isn't one argument," I replied calmly as I continued packing. "This is you finally telling me what you really think of me after 3 years of pretending to be supportive. And now I know exactly what I need to do." Marcus tried every manipulation tactic he had used successfully for years. He guilt-tripped me about abandoning our relationship. He minimized his hurtful words as stress-induced mistakes. He promised to change his attitude and be more supportive. He even tried to convince me that I was misunderstanding his intentions and that he only wanted to protect me from disappointment. But none of it worked anymore. I had finally seen behind the mask, and there was no going back to the dynamic that had kept me small and dependent for so long. I moved in with a colleague temporarily while I figured out my next steps. The first thing I did was throw myself completely into my work, with a focus and determination I had never experienced before. Without Marcus's constant criticism and undermining comments, I began to remember why I had loved practicing law in the first place. Over the next 18 months, I worked harder and more strategically than I ever had before. I volunteered for challenging cases, built relationships with key partners, and consistently delivered exceptional results for clients. But more importantly, I began trusting my own judgment again, instead of seeking validation from others. Without Marcus's voice in my head telling me I wasn't qualified or capable, I started taking calculated risks that led to bigger opportunities. I pitched innovative legal strategies to senior partners. I developed new approaches to complex cases. I began building a reputation as someone who could handle the most challenging assignments with creativity and skill. The transformation wasn't just professional. Personally, I began rebuilding the confidence that Marcus had systematically destroyed. I started networking again, attending industry events and developing relationships with other ambitious lawyers who celebrated my successes instead of minimizing them. 8 months after leaving Marcus, I was promoted to senior associate. 12 months after that, I was offered a path to partnership that would typically take other lawyers much longer to achieve. The partners recognized not just my legal skills, but my ability to bring in new clients and lead complex cases with exceptional results. During this entire period, Marcus attempted to contact me multiple times. He sent flowers to my office with apology notes. He showed up at professional events where he knew I would be present. He even tried to convince mutual friends to advocate for him, claiming that I had overreacted to what he characterized as a minor disagreement. But I never responded to any of his attempts at reconciliation. I had no interest in relitigating our relationship or explaining to him why his behavior had been unacceptable. I was too busy proving to myself exactly what I could accomplish when I wasn't being held back by someone who claimed to love me. 18 months after Marcus told me I would never survive without him, I received the call that would validate everything I had believed about my own potential. The managing partner of my firm called me into his office on a Tuesday morning and offered me junior partnership, effective immediately. "Rachel," he said, "your work over the past year and a half has been exceptional. You've brought in significant new business, handled complex cases with remarkable skill, and demonstrated the kind of leadership we want to see more of in this firm. We'd like to offer you a partnership track that will make you one of the youngest partners in the firm's history." The terms of the partnership were beyond anything I had dared to hope for. Not only would I be gaining an ownership stake in one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, but I would also be leading my own team and having input on the firm's strategic direction. That evening, I celebrated with colleagues who had become genuine friends and supporters. As I looked around the table at people who had encouraged my ambitions and celebrated my successes, I realized how different my life had become since removing Marcus's toxic influence. But there was one more piece of business I needed to handle to completely close the chapter on that relationship. The apartment Marcus and I had shared was in a building I had chosen, in a neighborhood I loved, with a lease I had negotiated, and rent I had been paying throughout our entire relationship. When I left that night 18 months earlier, I had continued paying the full rent while staying with friends and colleagues, essentially allowing Marcus to live in an apartment he couldn't afford on his own. The day after my partnership was announced, I contacted the building management company and began the process of removing Marcus's name from the lease. Since I had been the primary tenant and sole rent payer from the beginning, the process was straightforward from a legal standpoint. I also hired a moving company to collect my remaining belongings from the apartment while Marcus was at work. I left him a letter explaining that his tenancy would be ending in 30 days, as specified in the lease agreement, and that he would need to find alternative housing arrangements. The letter was professional and factual, but I couldn't resist including one final paragraph. "You told me I would never survive without you. I'm writing this letter from my new office as the youngest junior partner in my firm's history. I think we both know now which one of us was actually holding the other back." Marcus called me dozens of times that day, alternating between anger and desperation. He couldn't believe I was being so vindictive over what he still characterized as a minor disagreement. He claimed he had been supporting me financially throughout our relationship, despite the fact that I had receipts showing I had paid for virtually everything during our 3 years together. But perhaps most revealing was his final voicemail, where his mask completely slipped and he revealed the depth of his resentment about my success. "You think you're so much better than me now because of some stupid promotion, but you'll see what happens when you don't have someone keeping you humble. Your ego is going to destroy everything you think you've accomplished." I saved that voicemail as a reminder of exactly why I had been right to leave, and exactly why I should never doubt my instincts about people who claim to love me while actively working to undermine my success. Today, 3 years after Marcus told me I would never survive without him, I'm a successful partner at a top-tier law firm, living in an apartment I own, surrounded by people who genuinely support my ambitions and celebrate my achievements. I've learned that the right people in your life will encourage you to reach higher, not convince you to aim lower. The best revenge wasn't removing his name from a lease or achieving professional success despite his predictions. The best revenge was discovering who I really was when I wasn't being held back by someone who needed me to stay small in order to feel big himself. Marcus was right about one thing. I did survive without him. But what he never understood was that I didn't just survive. I thrived in ways that would have been impossible while I was wasting energy trying to make someone love me who was secretly threatened by my potential. If this story shocked you, just wait for what's next. Leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and of course, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single notification.